Hi, my name is Chris Munns. I'm the chairperson of the Hampton Democratic Committee. I'm here today with our 5 candidates for New Hampshire State Representative for a discussion about some of the important issues facing our town and our state. 4 of these candidates are running for the 4 seats representing just Hampton. They are State Representative Renny Cushing, State Representative Mike Edgar, Katherine Harake, and State Representative Tom Loughman. Our 5th candidate is former State Representative Elaine Ahearn, who is running to once again represent Hampton, Hampton Falls, and Seabrook. Renny, let me start with you. You have been an advocate for social and economic justice inside and outside of the legislature. What are the challenges that we still need to address in New Hampshire as we move forward?
Well, of course, the first thing we need to do is to get the COVID-19 crisis under control, to get a handle on the pandemic. And while I recognize that, at the state and local level, I think there's been a fine, measured response to the crisis. What we've lacked sorely is leadership at the top, and hopefully that will change soon. But what the COVID-19 pandemic has done is actually exacerbated a number of problems that were existing before the pandemic came upon us. And just to list off some of them, we were in the middle of an opioid crisis before the pandemic hit. And by all accounts, the opioid crisis has just grown worse as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here in Hampton, I think we're lucky that we have, SOS Recovery has located here to provide some peer-to-peer harm reduction modeled, assistance to those who are suffering from substance use disorder. But I think the state is going to have to step up its response to that crisis. The same thing goes with our, issues of domestic violence. There's, it's really difficult when you're told to shelter at home if the person that you're sheltering with is an abuser. And all the reports that I get from the 13 shelters for domestic violence in the state of New Hampshire is that there is, there's an epidemic of domestic violence that's going on. And again, we were already in a difficult situation where last year there were over 1,000 adults who were seeking shelter from their abusers that had to be turned away because we didn't have the capacity to do that. We need to address domestic violence issues. We're in the midst of a mental health crisis, and for a short period of time, some progress had been made. We got to the point where we no longer were housing people with acute mental illness, just holding them in emergency rooms from community hospitals until they could get a psychiatric bed available. But since the pandemic, the situation has reversed itself, and it's complicated. But right now, it's unfortunate. I guess last week, I think there were about 40 adults and a number of children who were in emergency rooms of community hospitals waiting to get treated for their mental illness, but there was no beds available. That crisis in our mental health care systems still remains. And again, we still engage in the barbaric practice in the state of New Hampshire of taking our most acute mentally ill patients and putting them inside the walls of the state prison instead of treating them in a psychiatric hospital. Again, we're on the cusp, I think, for the first time in 30 years, the legislature allocated some money and made a commitment to build a psychiatric hospital. It remains to be seen what will happen as we move forward through the pandemic into the next day, if the resources will still be there. I mean, the problem is still going to be there with this group of patients that we criminalize instead of treat as people with an illness. What remains to be seen is if we will have we will follow through on our commitment to actually make this fundamental change. Those are some areas. I think that we realize that there's a whole issue of police reform that became manifest, certainly at a national level during the time of the pandemic. Over the past 6 months, we're having a national conversation on policing. Here in New Hampshire, I will give the governor a shout out for establishing a committee, law enforcement accountability and transparency, which met over the summer. I participated in, and has come up with a number of recommendations that I think should be adopted and implemented. It'll be up to the legislature to carry out many of those, but they include enhanced training for members of law enforcement, helping people to deal with, the issues of, unconscious bias, trying to make use of the technology. A few years ago, I sponsored legislation to provide for police body-worn cameras on law enforcement, but we don't make it mandatory. And we need to step up so that we have a uniform system of policing. Doesn't matter whether it's the 03842 or 03301, no matter what the zip code in the state of New Hampshire is, should not dictate the level of professionalism in law enforcement that one can expect and should expect. So I expect to see a continued conversation about law enforcement that'll take place, and it's a necessary one, and also just kind of a underlying issue of race and equity in the state of New Hampshire. I think that we need to have perhaps a more honest conversation than we've ever had in the state about what it means to be a full member of our society here in the state. And I see people of color in our state leading that conversation, and I support it, and I look forward to being part of that. I don't know if I want
How about
throw
some
it off to others, but
some of the others on the call? What are your thoughts?
Well, I would like to, as somebody who's running for the first time, like to say that before I was involved with this campaign, I heard of Renny, I knew of Renny. His reputation precedes him. And Renny, I want to say that you are the heart of the Democrat Party in Hampton and maybe in New Hampshire. And everything you've talked about is exactly how I feel, and why in terms of, we're all think we're good people. We all want to help. But that we can't help one person at a time. We can't just do our little good with our neighbor and leave it at there. We're all so busy. Society, we have to work together, and then government has to help us out. And you're on the forefront of that. And please keep forging ahead. I'm behind you.
Well, we look forward to working together, Katherine, next year.
Tom, do you have any thoughts on this issue of social and economic justice?
Sure. Listen, one of the issues we have in our politics and our society even is this binary thinking and these false choices that are pushed on us by partisan interests. We can see and acknowledge that there are injustices, instances of police brutality, opportunities for reform, while also supporting men and women of law enforcement. And it's this idea that you always have to be on one side or the other, that it's the politics of division that keep us from solving problems, that keep us from coming together off opportunities we see right before our very eyes to achieving advances in social and economic justice. So I think, one of the common challenges we have as citizens, as voters, is to reject politics of division and to think critically about our opportunities, to find common sense opportunities to work together, and to reject the idea that we can't fix these problems that we see right before our very eyes. That you can believe these two things at once. They're not mutually exclusive. So reject the politics of division and work together. I think we're all in full campaign swing right now. We see who's doing it and who's not. I would ask that our voters reward the politics of bringing people together to solve our common challenges. I think that's how we get better. That's how we improve.
Mike, how about you? You've been in the legislature now for 5 years. I mean, what are your observations?
Well, the way I'd like to mention something about some of the issues of policing is because we have been able to meet with like our chief several different times. In fact, the latest time Katherine had arranged for it, and it's just good talks to see some things sometimes from their perspective, and also maybe some of the things that inhibit us from making things safer for us all, such as the New Hampshire. We're kind of extreme. Some of the people on the other side who pushed issues that just, I say, as far as identifying people, when there's a problem, or not even being able to have the police use readers where they can tell who is in, let's say, the parking lot when they're driving by, to try to spot if there's people who have warrants and all that, or troublemakers. That right now we have it to the point where when I called AAA one time, it was interesting to say that, oh no, we can't look at your ID. We're not allowed to do that in New Hampshire. We can in Maine, but we can't look at it in New Hampshire. But there are some, just extreme, as I consider them, secrecy measures that we have. We encountered one at Public Works where the cameras that we used in some of the parking rides where they were having robberies and assaults, they couldn't have that feed go to the police station because it was going to violate somebody's rights. I don't think it was violating the rights of the people that were getting stolen or beaten up. So I just, there's some things like that I think that would help them with their tools to help them do in a sense, a better job, more efficient job for us. So that's one thing which is a little bit different from what we're talking about right now, but it's one of the things that was mentioned when we got to sit down with the chiefs.
Okay. Elaine, your thoughts on this issue?
Conversations that I've had with a lot of people around here is they don't think that this problem actually exists in New Hampshire. So I wish they could talk to Mike and hear what he just said, because they don't know anything about what's going on at the Park of Ride or the fact that this is infringing on somebody's rights. AAA can't ask for your ID. How crazy is that? It's frightening to me that a lovely girl who lived with me for a long period of time, her name is Sophie Lloyd, and she was working on Hillary's campaign. And the third day she was staying here, she looked at me and said, "What should I do if I get stopped by the police on the way home?" And I said, "Why would anybody stop you?" She said, "I'm a Black woman in New Hampshire." And she was very frightened. And it had never occurred to me that she should be worried about something like that. But she was very worried. So, and she said, "How many other Black women do you see here in Hampton Falls or Hampton or any place else?" And I said, "Yeah, no, you're absolutely right." And she did feel as though she could be in a dangerous position. And so it certainly opened my eyes to what it was like to walk in somebody else's shoes. And she's a lovely, lovely woman who you just can't imagine anyone wanting to do anything to her, but she is very aware of that that's a possibility.
Okay. Any other further comments on this topic?
Well, just to circle back on the whole issue of police and law enforcement, I know, for instance, that there were members of law enforcement who were the most vociferous supporters of a requirement that every member of law enforcement has to undergo psychological evaluation, that they have to undergo drug treatment, that they want to establish a high level of quality and professionalism, because it's the rogue person who casts a shadow on everybody else who's out there day in and day out trying to do their job. And again, we have a responsibility, not just to talk about it, but sometimes we have to put our money where our mouth is, and we need to be able to step up. And for instance, we need to fund adequately training at the state police, at the Police Standards and Training Academy.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for this the discussion of this topic. For more information about these candidates and others running for office this year, you can go to our website, www.hamptonnhdems.org, or you can visit our Facebook page at Hampton Dems. Stay safe and make sure you go out and vote.